Welcome to Sleep Theater Radio, where we bring you immersive tales accompanied with ambient rain and thunder. Tonight's story takes us to the world of Endiness, an age long after the fall of gods and dragons. The War of the Dragoons has slipped into legend, their spirits scattered across the broken continents, lying silent beneath centuries of dust. But not all embers fade. Some sleep, some wait, and when the time comes, they burn again. In the shattered valleys beyond the ancient Wingley ruins, the world is learning to breathe once more. Stone by stone, breath by breath, new kingdoms rise from the bones of ruin, carving their fragile peace across lands shaped by old wars. And among the scholars who sift through relics of that forgotten age is a man named Lucen, searching for meaning in the echoes of a time few dare to remember. Yet deep beneath the earth, far below the reach of sunlight, something ancient stirs. The pulse of a dragon's heart, entombed within crystal glass, beating again after 1,000 years of silence. What wakes when the fires sleep no longer? What becomes of man when the divine remembers its flame? You're listening to The Legend of Dragoon, Reign of Ashes, a Sleep Theater radio story. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to bring stories to life through the rain and the thunder. The storm begins now. Chapter 1, The Valley of Glass. The rain swept through the valley in slow, silver curtains, thin enough to see through, heavy enough to wash the world clean. Beneath the drifting veil of mist, the land glittered faintly. Shards of translucent stone jutted from the ground like broken mirrors, their surfaces slick with rainwater and memory. Lucen moved carefully across the uneven terrain, his cloak soaked through, his boots sinking into the softened earth. He was not a soldier, nor an adventurer. He was a scholar of lost epochs, a keeper of texts half erased by time. The satchel at his side clinked softly with quills, ink, and fragments of fossilized bone wrapped in linen. The locals called this place the Valley of Glass, a scar left behind from the divine dragon's fall. Long ago, the heat of its death cry had turned the soil to crystal, and though centuries had passed, the land still shimmered with the memory of that fire. Lucen crouched beside one of the towering formations. Inside the cloudy quartz, faint veins of crimson pulsed like blood beneath skin. He ran a gloved hand along the surface, tracing the ancient scorch marks spiraling across the shard's length. "This is dragonfire," he whispered in quiet awe, still alive after all this time. He opened his notebook and began to sketch. The pages grew damp in the mist, but the ink held. His script was dense, old Wingley runes mingling with human dialects. Every ruin he studied spoke of ambition, of the arrogance of the gods, and of the heavy price men paid to unseat them. A bright flash lit the valley. Lightning carved the sky open, revealing the jagged silhouettes of collapsed towers on the horizon. Once Ilvan had stood there, a Wingley citadel where dragons were dissected and their spirits harvested for war. Now the crumbling towers leaned like gravestones, half buried in the glass that had swallowed the land. Thunder answered softly in the distance. Lucen turned at the sound, but something else moved beneath the echo, a tone lower, deeper, a slow and rhythmic thrum. It felt almost alive, like a heartbeat. He stilled. The rain thickened, streaking down his cloak as he stepped forward. He followed the pulsing vibration into a narrow ravine lined with skeletal wings and fused bones, remnants of ancient beasts swallowed by crystal. The ground hummed beneath his steps, each vibration moving through the valley like a buried memory. Then he saw it. Half buried in translucent stone lay a dragon's heart, massive, fossilized, yet pulsing faintly with a molten red glow. Veins of light stretched outward through the glass like lightning frozen in time. It was the size of a man's torso, untouched by the centuries that had buried it. Lucen approached slowly, unable to speak at first. "This is impossible," he whispered in disbelief. He reached out. Warmth radiated from the crystal, meeting his fingertips. When he touched it fully, the glow flared bright, and the valley answered with a deep, resonant roar that vibrated through the mountains. The rain lifted as steam in the sudden heat. Lucen stumbled back, shielding his eyes as the heart pulsed again. The crystal cracked with a sharp, echoing rupture, glowing veins spreading outward like fire racing through ice. Then, stillness. When the mist finally thinned, the heart no longer shone. Only faint embers flickered deep within, dimming like the last breath of a dream. Lucen stood trembling, Water dripped from his brow, and his reflection broke and reformed across the glassy terrain. Whatever had stirred beneath the earth had felt his touch, and whatever it was not finished dreaming. Chapter 2, The Ashborn Spirit. The storm had not ceased with morning. It fell in a steady, whispered chant over the valley, sliding down the glass fields and the leaning ruins of Ilvan like a soft lament. Every shard glittered beneath the rain, each one catching the pale light of dawn and turning it into fractured flame. Lucen had not slept. He made camp beneath a broken arch of wingly marble, where ancient runes had long since faded into smooth, pale stone. The rain could not touch him there, though the cold crept in with the persistence of something alive. He sat before the dragon's fossilized heart, now cracked open like a seed split by fire. Its glow had faded through the night, reduced to a faint ember that pulsed deep within the stone. The pulse itself had stopped hours ago, yet the hum remained. It wasn't a sound, not truly. It was a sensation, a vibration threading through Lucen's bones, a whisper in his marrow that refused to fade. He had studied Dragoon relics before. Shattered helms, inert spirit stones, petrified wings preserved in dust older than kingdoms. But this was different. This was not memory forged by scholars or priests. This was life, or something very close to it. Lucen reached into his satchel and drew out a crystal shard he'd collected days earlier. It refracted the ember light inside the dragon's heart, filling the shard with a faint, ghostly glow. He turned it slowly, watching faint crimson veins shift beneath its surface as though stirred by breath. "This looks like an echo," he said softly, speaking in a reverent whisper, or perhaps a memory. He pressed the shard gently against the cracked heart. The hum deepened at once. A shiver rose through the valley, lightning flared across the sky, and heat rippled beneath the rain. The ground vibrated, groaning under forces that had rested for centuries. Then a whisper brushed against Lucen's thoughts. "Bearer." He froze, breath caught in his throat. The word had never been spoken aloud, yet it carried the weight of thousands of years, sliding into his mind like a blade through silk. He stumbled back and clutched his head, but the voice followed, soft, ancient, heavy with sorrow. "The flame remembers you." Lucen collapsed to his knees as visions surged through him in a torrent of light. He saw the sky torn wide by fire. He saw dragoons soaring through ash-choked winds, their wings burning like living banners. He saw crimson armor blazing brighter than dawn itself, and then shattering into a storm of fragments that rained across Endiness like falling stars. He tore his hand away from the heart. The visions vanished. Reality returned in a cold rush. Lucen knelt there trembling, gasping for breath. The shard in his hand no longer glimmered like glass. It burned with a faint, pulsing red, the same impossible hue as the ancient heart. He turned it over, mesmerized. The surface was warm, alive, and the warmth pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. The wind shifted. The rain carried something new. A sound, not thunder. Wings. Massive, distant, rhythmic, like a creature passing overhead on currents older than language. Lucen raised his eyes to the mist. A shadow drifted through the storm clouds, long, serpentine, vast enough to swallow the sky. The valley shuddered in its wake. Whatever he had awakened, it was no longer dreaming. He pulled his cloak tight against the cold and tucked the glowing shard beneath it. Then he turned toward the ravine's mouth and began the long climb out of the valley of glass. Behind him, the dragon's heart smoldered. The faint ember deep within flared once, twice. Then a thin tongue of flame licked through the surface fissure, curling upward through the rain, refusing to die. For an instant, in the glow of that flame, the silhouette of wings unfurled across the glass. Chapter 3, The Wound Beneath the Sky. The storm had drifted into memory by the time Lucen reached the high cliffs overlooking the northern plain. Dawn broke slowly across the horizon, its pale light settling over the land like dust on old parchment. The air was quiet in a way that made the skin tighten, a quiet born not of peace, but aftermath. His cloak had stiffened with dried mud, and the satchel at his side felt heavier than it had the night before. The spirit shard pulsed faintly inside, its glow struggling against the soft light of morning. Lucen rested a hand against it as he surveyed the view below. The wasteland stretched for miles, a barren sweep of ash-colored stone and shattered ruins. Lines of wingly glyphs glimmered faintly across broken surfaces, glowing with the same rhythmic hum that had threaded through his bones since the valley. This was Therion's Gate, once a city suspended in the clouds, a marvel of magic and arrogance. Its fall had torn a wound into the world that had never fully closed. Fractured towers jutted toward the sky like broken ribs, marking the grave of a civilization that believed it could bind dragons and command gods. Lucen began his descent. The air quivered around him with every step. The hum grew stronger near the glyphs, vibrating up through the soles of his boots and settling behind his heart like a soft drumbeat. It was the same resonance he'd felt in the valley, the same consciousness whispering through the dragon's heart. At the foot of the ravine, he found what remained of a temple. Its domed ceiling lay in ruin, collapsed in a tangle of cracked stone and trailing ivy. The air inside smelled faintly of iron, as though the walls remembered blood. Lucen stepped into the chamber. Ancient carvings lined the walls. Dragoons kneeling before titanic dragons, their wings drawn as flowing arcs of fire. Runic chains wrapped around each depiction, spiraling from one panel to the next. Circles intertwined like constellations, marking a ritual older than the kingdoms that now ruled Endiness. At the center, untouched by decay, stood a mural painted with impossible precision. A figure with crimson wings held a burning sphere aloft toward a dragon whose eyes glowed with twin suns. Lucen reached out, brushing the surface with trembling fingers. The paint was warm. The moment he touched it, the world shifted. Light overwhelmed his vision, and the chamber dissolved into brilliance. The air thickened with heat and voices as if thousands of spirits chanted through a single breath. He stood within a memory. Winglies knelt in concentric circles, their robes trailing behind them like feathers of smoke. Columns of flame coiled upward as they offered the souls of fallen dragoons to the heavens. Each soul ignited in brilliant arcs of color before spiraling inward toward a central sphere of molten light. A towering figure hovered above them. Shaped like a man, but forged of wings and flame, its presence bent the air around it. A voice resounded, neither male nor female. "We seal the heavens that none may rise again." The chamber blazed white. Lucen gasped and stumbled backward as the vision shattered. The light faded, and the temple returned. But the mural before him had changed. The crimson figure's wings were torn. The burning sphere had vanished. Only a hollow void remained where the heart of the ritual once burned. Lucen's pulse quickened. A scrape of stone echoed behind him, deliberate, slow, unmistakably alive. He turned sharply. A figure stood in the temple archway. It wore tattered robes darkened by centuries of dust. A bronze mask obscured its face, the metal etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with cold blue light. Through the eye slits, two dim embers watched him with unsettling calm. In its hand, the figure held a shard, shaped like Lucen's, but black as obsidian and pulsing with a cold, hungry glow. "You shouldn't have come here," the masked figure said in a low, rasping voice. Lucen's hand dropped toward his satchel, where his own shard flared in response. The pulse surged against his palm, reacting instinctively to the presence of its counterpart. The masked figure tilted its head, studying him. "So another spirit has found a host," he said, his tone heavy with recognition. Lucen steadied himself. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sharp with caution. The figure raised the dark shard, letting its cold glow spill across the broken floor. "I am the keeper of what remains," he said in a voice carved from ash, "and soon, perhaps, the last dragoon of Endiness." Light broke across the sky outside, splitting the mist with a harsh brilliance. Lucen shielded his eyes for a moment. When the light faded, the masked figure was gone. Only the echo of his departing spirit lingered, a streak of cold blue fading into the distance, and the faint whisper of wings stirring the air like a warning of storms yet to come. Chapter 4: The Herald of Flames. The storm returned that night with purpose, pulled toward the mountains as though the clouds themselves had scented blood on the wind. Lightning crawled across the sky in jagged veins, briefly illuminating the broken aqueduct stretching through the dark like the spine of some long-dead titan. Lucen moved along its fractured edge, boots splashing through shallow pools collected in the stone channels. His cloak clung to him, heavy with rain, but the real weight pressed from within, a heat in his chest that pulsed like a buried forge. The shard inside his satchel throbbed faintly with every heartbeat, answering some distant call he could not yet name. The image of the masked figure haunted him, the cold blue gleam behind the bronze mask, the black shard pulsing in that stranger's hand. Since leaving Therion's gate, the ancient voice in Lucen's mind had fallen silent, yet the ember of it still churned beneath his ribs, restless and awake. By the time he reached the cliff overlooking the ruins of Serdio, night had deepened into a suffocating cloak. The valley below was alive with flickering orange light, dozens of campfires scattered among the shattered remains of old stone battlements. Lucen dropped to one knee behind a ridge, squinting through the rain. The banners below snapped in the wind, a red sun split by a black sword. No crest of any kingdom he knew. Men and women clad in dark armor knelt among the tents, their helmets bowed toward a tall figure standing before a roaring pyre. Lucen's breath caught. The man wore blackened steel shaped like cooled magma, veins of molten crimson pulsing beneath the plates. And from his back, unfurled like the wings of a storm-born god, burned true dragoon wings, fire incarnate, sweeping the rain aside in sheets of steam. The man lifted a blade forged from pure flame. Sparks rained from the weapon as he spoke, his voice deep and resonant enough to carry through the storm. "The gods are gone," he declared, his tone sharp and commanding. "But their children remain. For centuries, we bowed to the silence of heaven. No longer. The flame that once guarded man will now cleanse him." The shard at Lucen's side flared violently. Heat surged through his arm, and for a fleeting instant his shadow bent unnaturally, two faint wings of red flickering behind him like ghosts. Below, the fire-born dragoon paused mid-sentence. Slowly, impossibly, he turned his head toward the cliff. Lucen went still. The man's eyes burned through the dark, molten, unwavering, ancient. They locked on him with the precision of a predator. Then the pyre erupted. A pillar of flame tore upward, splitting the sky and forcing the rain to evaporate before it touched the blaze. The fire spiraled into a serpentine column, rising until it coiled above the valley like a dragon composed of pure inferno. Lucen shielded his face as the heat rolled across the ridge, scorching the air. The ground trembled beneath his boots. Through the chaos, he saw the dragoon rise from the valley floor, lifted effortlessly by wings of fire that beat with the rhythm of a war drum. For a moment, time froze. Lucen saw the armor clearly. The design of the red-eyed dragoon, but corrupted, older, shaped by hands that predated every recorded legend. This was no relic of Dart's lineage. This was something born from the first fires, something that should not exist. Lucen turned, running along the aqueduct as the ground shook beneath him. Flames climbed the valley walls behind him, and the air burned with unnatural heat. From far above, the dragoon's voice crashed across the mountains like rolling thunder. "The world was forged in fire, scholar," he said, his tone cold and certain, "and it will burn again." Lucen looked back just long enough to see the sky ignite, and in that instant, the valley of Serdio became a crucible of flame. Chapter 5, The Forgotten Pact. By dawn, the fire on the horizon had faded into a smoldering wound. Smoke drifted over the mountains like wounded beasts dragging themselves across the sky, and every gust of wind carried the bitter scent of ash. Lucen didn't stop moving until the sun pushed through the clouds, pale, thin, and exhausted, as though the heavens themselves had burned overnight. He found shelter beneath the remains of an ancient aquifer carved directly into the cliffs. Its stone rings were massive and half buried in shadow, each one etched with runes far older than the Wingly Age. Scholars had argued over their origins for centuries. None had ever deciphered a single mark. Lucen sank to the floor near the entrance, his breath ragged. His hands trembled as he touched the shard at his belt. The crimson core had dimmed, but its fire had not died. When he lifted it toward the light, it pulsed faintly in perfect time with his heartbeat. He stared at it, voice hoarse. "What are you trying to show me?" he asked quietly. The shard offered no answer, only that constant hum, low and steady as breath. Lucen pressed his head against the cold wall. Exhaustion dragged at his bones, yet sleep refused to come. The hum grew deeper, heavier, resonating through the cavern until the stones themselves seemed to vibrate. Then the runes on the walls ignited. Red light crawled across the ancient symbols, pulsing with the same rhythm as the shard in his hands. The floor beneath him shuddered. A circular section split open, revealing a descending platform carved from obsidian and fossilized bone. Heat poured from the darkness below, the scent of scorched metal and old power. Before Lucen could move, the shard flared bright enough to blind him. A force seized his chest, pulling him forward. He stepped onto the platform, unable to resist as it sank into the earth. The light dimmed gradually, revealing a chamber so vast it felt carved out of the world's heart. Pillars shaped like dragon claws arched toward a ceiling lost in shadow. At the center floated a monolith of polished stone, its surface etched with dragoon sigils, familiar ones, and symbols he had never seen in any record. A voice spoke. The pact was made in fire. The pact was broken in blood. Lucen spun toward the sound. There was no figure behind him, no speaker. The words came from the walls, the pillars, the stone itself. We bound the spirits to flesh, to mortal will, and so we chained eternity. The monolith pulsed, and vision struck him like lightning. He saw dragoons gathered beneath a burning sky, kneeling before the divine dragon as they forged a sacred promise, a vow to wield power without letting it consume them. He saw the pact sealed in flame, a bond meant to protect the world from its own hunger. But then the fire twisted. He saw betrayal, a dragoon crowned in crimson light, his spirit overtaking his soul until nothing human remained. The sky burned beneath his wings. Towns turned to ash, dragons screamed and fell, the herald of flames. Lucen staggered back, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. He wasn't a new dragoon, he whispered aloud. He was one of the first. The monolith shifted in color, from crimson to gold, then to blinding white. The voice returned, strained now, urgent. If he awakens the pack's ashes, the heavens will burn anew. Seek the vault beneath the sea of clouds. The weapon still sleeps. The cavern trembled violently. Cracks split across the monolith, spilling molten light into the abyss. Dust rained from the ceiling as Lucen raced for the rising platform, clutching the shard like a lifeline. The lift surged upward, carrying him back toward daylight. Then the sound came. A roar so ancient, so vast, it felt older than language. A sound that shook the cavern, the cliffs, the mountains above. A sound that made every part of him go cold. The dragons were waking. Chapter 6, The Maw of Dragons. The mountains bled smoke for 3 days. Lucen followed the path carved by the tremors, climbing higher into the frozen peaks that divided Milicesso from the world beyond. The air thinned with every step, sharp as glass in his lungs, cold enough to bite bone. The shard at his side pulsed faster as he ascended, each beat matching the frantic rhythm in his chest. By the 4th day, the storm returned, but not as rain. Snow fell in heavy sheets, swallowing the world in white. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at his cloak and drowning all sound except the steady, rhythmic thud rising from beneath the ice. A heartbeat. Lucen crested a plateau shrouded in fog. Streams of steam curled upward from a massive fissure in the earth, turning snow to vapor before it could land. The chasm glowed faintly red, and far below, something coiled and immense shifted in the darkness. Scales, thousands of them, sliding like continents in motion. The Maw of Dragons was not a place. It was a wound, a hollow beneath the mountain, where the last great beasts of Endiness lay dreaming. Lucen knelt at the fissure's edge and set down his lantern. Its flame shuddered violently, as though afraid of the dark below. He drew the shard from his pouch. It burned hot against his palm, brighter than ever before, desperate to leap free. He whispered, "Show me what you want." The shard pulsed once, then it slipped from his fingers and fell. Lucen reached instinctively, but it vanished into the glow. A heartbeat later, the mountain responded. The world exploded. A pillar of molten fire tore upward, splitting the storm and casting the plateau in hellish red light. The ground cracked beneath him, the force hurling him backward across the snow. Steam roared from the fissure as something enormous stirred in the depths. Then 2 eyes opened. Vast as moons, burning as suns, the dragon looked up from the abyss, the weight of its gaze older than kingdoms, older than war. Its wings, fused to stone by centuries of sleep, strained against the prison of ice and darkness. Lucen staggered to his feet, shielding his face against the heat. A voice reached him. Not sound, but pressure. It shook the marrow in his bones. "You carry my heart, mortal," the dragon said. Lucen's throat tightened. "You're the one from the valley," he whispered in disbelief. "Part of me," the dragon replied. "What was stolen, what was broken, the herald would take it back." Lucen braced himself against the wind. "Tell me how to stop him!" The dragon lowered its head, molten eyes narrowing. Endiness is a circle of fire. The dragoons are its flame bearers. The only way to stop one is to light another. Lucen stepped forward. I don't understand, but there was no time. A streak of red flame tore across the sky. It hit the snow with a shattering blast, sending a wave of heat ripping across the plateau. The corrupted dragoon descended in a meteor trail of fire, his burning wings scattering the storm into clouds of steam. The Herald of Flames landed between Lucen and the dragon's chasm, sword of living fire burning in his hand. He regarded Lucen with molten eyes. So the scholar lives, he said in a voice distorted by flame. Tell me, does it still whisper to you? Does it promise power? Lucen steadied himself, his heart hammering. It promised balance, he said firmly. The herald tilted his head. Then you already know balance is a lie. He raised his burning blade. The mountain ignited. Lucen dove aside as a wave of fire sheared across the snow, vaporizing everything in its path. The sleeping dragon roared, a sound so vast and furious it cracked the surrounding ice. Shards of molten stone rained from above like burning stars. The shard pulsed violently on the ground beside him, answering the herald's rage. Lucen grabbed it, and for an instant he saw his own reflection wreathed in crimson light. Spectral wings flickering behind him like ghosts rising from ash. He had no armor, no Dragoon Spirit, no weapon. But he had the fire. Lucen thrust the shard toward the herald, shouting through the storm, "Then let's see if your flame burns brighter than mine." The world erupted in light, and the mountain screamed. Chapter 7, The Silver Veins of Heaven. The mountain burned for 7 days. When the fires finally dimmed, the world above was buried beneath a veil of ash. The storm had fled, leaving the sky carved open by streaks of silver lightning that refused to fade. They traced the heavens in branching lines, glowing like veins pulsing through a living heart. Lucen awoke amid the ruins of ice and scorched stone. His cloak hung off him in tatters. His hands blistered, his lips cracked with smoke and blood. Every breath tasted of burned air. The shard lay beside him, dim but whole. Its glow sputtered like an ember fighting to stay alive. Lucen knelt over it, whispering hoarsely, "You survived, somehow." But he did not remember how he survived. The herald's final strike was a blur. Only fire, the mountain's roar, and the dragon's voice echoing through the inferno like a dying god calling out one last time. Everything after that was darkness. He rose slowly, each movement stiff with ache, and surveyed what remained of the summit. The great fissure had sealed itself with molten stone, hardening into a jagged scar across the peak. The dragon was gone, its presence carved out of the air as if swallowed by the mountain itself. In its place, a single column of molten silver light rose from the earth and pierced the heavens. It shimmered relentlessly, even against the morning sun. Lucen shielded his eyes, the light cutting through him like a blade. Inside its radiance, he saw fleeting images, cities floating above clouds, airships drifting across crystal seas, figures armored in spectral wings soaring through a sky rebuilt on the bones of an older age. Then he heard the hum. Deep, mechanical, unmistakably man-made. The silver pillar rippled, the visions sharpened. An airship descended through the clouds, a colossal vessel of obsidian and polished silver, its hull carved with angular runes. The emblem of Tiberoa glowed near its prow, though altered, stylized, modernized by hands that had never known the age of dragoons. Lucen stared upward as the warship slowed, casting a massive shadow over the mountain. Hatches opened on its underside, releasing plumes of steam. Lines of cannons glimmered behind armored shutters. Cables unspooled downward, lowering a small platform to the snow. Lucen staggered toward it, his legs nearly giving way. A woman stood upon the platform, tall, poised, clad in plated silver armor trimmed in deep cobalt cloth. Her hair whipped violently in the cold wind. She raised her voice, projecting over the roar of the engines. "By order of the Tiberon Sky Council, identify yourself!" Lucen braced himself against the platform's edge. "My name is Lucen of Fletz," he said, his breath ragged. "I am a scholar, nothing more." The woman's eyes narrowed behind her visor. "A scholar?" she repeated in disbelief. "There are no living settlements north of these peaks. You've crossed into restricted airspace." "I didn't come here by choice," Lucen said, tightening his grip on his satchel. "Something ancient is waking beneath this mountain. The dragons." He didn't finish. The moment he said the word, her expression shifted. Wariness turned to urgency. She signaled sharply to the crew above. "Lower the gate! Bring him aboard!" The platform touched the snow. 2 armored soldiers descended, gripping Lucen by the arms as the structure rose. Wind tore at his cloak as the summit fell away beneath them. As they lifted toward the airship's belly, Lucen glanced down one final time at the mountain. The silver column pulsed once. Then again. Its radiance bled outward, fracturing into thin, branching streams that spread across the sky like cracks in a shattered mirror. Lines of silver light raced across the horizon, dividing the heavens into jagged shards. Lucen stared upward, his voice barely more than breath. The sky, it's breaking, and the world above trembled in its sleep. Chapter 8, The Spirit's Trial. The airship Aegis of Tiburoa cut through the clouds like a blade, its hull humming with contained thunder. Lucen stood alone on the observation deck, wrapped in a borrowed coat, staring down at the world as it drifted beneath the ship. From this height, Endiness looked broken. Rivers of molten silver ran across its surface in jagged lines, glowing even through the daylight as they crawled across mountains, oceans, and forests. Each crack pointed back toward the scar in the north, the place where the Herald's fire had erupted. Every hour, the light spread wider. Captain Alara approached him, her boots steady against the trembling deck. Her armor gleamed in the stormlight, the crest of the Sky Council etched proudly into her pauldron. She stopped beside him, her voice low and controlled. "You've seen it too," she said quietly. "The sky bleeding light." Lucen nodded without looking away from the world below. "It isn't just light, it's the last threads of the Dragoon Pact unraveling." Alara watched his expression for a moment, then asked, "You believe this Herald of Flames is responsible?" "He isn't a Dragoon in the sense we understand," Lucen said. "He's older than our histories. He's a survivor of the First Age, fire given form." Alara's brows furrowed. "Then he's heading for the Sea of Clouds. That's where the weapon sleeps." Lucen turned sharply toward her. "How do you know that name?" "The Sky Council keeps records of the same prophecy you described," she answered. "It's why the Aegis was built, to stop anyone from reaching the weapon." Lucen exhaled slowly, watching lightning crawl across the clouds. "Then we're already behind him. He moves faster than any vessel can." Alara stepped closer, her voice firm. "Not if you help us. You said you carry a shard of the Spirit. That means you can sense him, track him, guide us." Lucen hesitated, one hand resting over the shard at his belt. "It's not like controlling a compass. It's presence, emotion. I feel him in my mind, as if he sleeps inside me." "Then wake him," Alara said. The engines deepened in pitch. The glass before them flickered with the reflection of lightning as the Aegis plunged deeper into the clouds. In the same moment, a whisper threaded itself through Lucen's thoughts, a voice made of heat and ash. "You are not his flame, but you will burn all the same." Lucen staggered, clutching the railing as the shard ignited in his hand. Red light pulsed through his veins, carving molten patterns across his arms. Crew members shouted behind him. Wind howled through the deck. Alara lunged forward and grabbed his shoulder. "Lucen, what's happening?" His eyes blazed with reflected fire. "I see him!" The world vanished. Lucen fell through smoke and crimson light into a vast plain of fire. Dragons circled overhead, their wings churning the inferno into a spiraling storm. Dragoons wearing armor of flame and shadow clashed across the burning horizon. At the center stood the Herald. His armor was cracked and blackened, molten fire seething beneath the plates. His wings, once vast, were now frayed embers drifting from his back. Yet his presence filled the realm like a collapsing star. He turned toward Lucen, voice echoing across the void. "You seek to replace me, bearer of ash, but you are no Dragoon. You are a thief clinging to a flame you do not understand." Lucen steadied himself against the heat. "If it's the fire that can stop you, I'll burn with it." The Herald laughed. The sound fractured the air like breaking glass. Then let the Spirit decide who is worthy. Flames erupted around them. Lucen's shard split open with light, and the world filled with scales, wings, and dragonfire. His body lifted from the ground as silver energy surged through him. Spectral wings of molten silver unfurled behind him, vast, luminous, trembling with power. The Spirit had awakened. Lucen gasped and opened his eyes. He was kneeling on the Aegis's deck, steam spiraling upward from the scorched metal around him. Crew members stood frozen, staring in disbelief. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Captain Alara stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. By the stars, Lucen, what are you? Behind him, the faint shimmer of two silver wings rippled in the air. Lucen rose slowly, the shard glowing in his fist. The trial begins, he said, his voice shaking. Outside the window, lightning coiled through the clouds, shaping itself into the outline of a dragon vast enough to swallow the sky. Chapter 9, Rain of Ashes. The sea of clouds stretched beneath them, an endless blanket of lightning, vapor, and broken sky. Mountains rose through the mist like the backs of sleeping titans, and storms rolled in wide, churning bands of silver light. The Aegis shuddered with every burst of thunder, its engines screaming as they pushed deeper into the storm's heart. Lucen stood at the bow, cloak torn by the wind, the faint shimmer of silver wings flickering behind him whenever the lightning hit just right. The shard at his side pulsed like a living ember, each beat echoing through his chest. Through the shifting fog below, flashes of fire burned in the depths, moving, alive. The Herald's Trail. Captain Alara strode beside him, her voice raised above the storm as her armor gleamed beneath the rain. We're closing in, she said in a firm, steady tone. The energy here is unlike anything we've ever recorded. Whatever the Herald seeks, it's waiting for him. Lucen kept his gaze forward. The weapon sealed beneath this place, he said quietly, the one the old pack tried to erase. Alara's eyes hardened. The god's last creation. A jagged bolt of lightning tore the sky open ahead of them. The clouds parted, and the world fell away. Suspended above the sea of clouds was a citadel of black stone, enormous and impossibly ancient, held aloft by chains of molten energy that plunged into the storm below. The air around it vibrated with a sound like distant drums, as if the world itself trembled at its awakening. Lucen whispered, "The Vault of Embers." Alara turned, shouting orders across the deck. "Cannons armed, anchor protocols ready, prepare for descent." But Lucen had already felt the shift, a pressure in the air, a tremor in his bones that made the shard flare in warning. The Herald was here. A pillar of fire erupted from the vault's core, ripping through the clouds like a spear of the sun. From within the burning light rose the Herald of Flames, reborn in full dragoon armor, its plates blazing white-hot, wings spread wide enough to scorch the sky. His sword burned with purified fire, brighter than lightning itself. He looked skyward, straight at the Aegis. His voice boomed across the clouds like rolling thunder. "You are too late, scholar." Lucen felt the shard flare violently in answer. "You cannot command what sleeps here," he shouted back, his voice shaking with the spirit's power. "It will devour you." The Herald raised his burning blade. It already has. The storm obeyed. Fire split the sky as molten bolts shot upward, striking the airship's hull with explosive force. Metal tore open. Engines burst into flame. The deck shuddered underfoot as the crew scrambled for cover. Alara grabbed the railing, shouting orders through the chaos. "Below deck, all hands below deck, now!" But Lucen didn't move. His gaze locked on the Herald. The spirit inside him roared awake, flooding his veins with light. The deck tilted sharply as the Aegis began to fall. Lucen ran forward and leaped into the storm. Wind and fire whipped around him as he plunged through the clouds, silver wings erupting fully from his back. The world tumbled in fragments of shadow and flame. He crashed onto the vault's highest bridge, stone cracking beneath the impact. The Herald descended in a spiral of fire, landing opposite him with the weight of an avalanche. His voice rolled through the burning air. "You would defy a god?" Lucen rose slowly, drawing the shard as it reshaped into a blade of molten silver. "Not a god," he said. "A man who forgot he wasn't one." The Herald lunged. They collided in a storm of fire and steel. Blades crashed, wings beat. Shockwaves tore through the air, splitting the clouds apart in violent bursts. The pillars anchoring the vault groaned as the battle's force cracked the stone beneath them. Lucen ducked a flaming strike, the heat singing his hair. He countered with a sweeping arc of silver light. The Herald blocked it with a roar, the impact splintering the bridge beneath them. Both were thrown back as the stone buckled. The Herald steadied himself bay, blood burning across his armor like molten veins. He snarled through the flame. "You think you're saving this world? Dragoons were always destroyers, heroes only in name." Lucen tightened his grip on the silver blade. "Then I'll be the last of us," he charged. Their blades met again, one of silver, one of fire, and the world detonated in blinding light. When the flare faded, the bridge lay in ruins. Lucen stood alone at the edge of the vault, his silver wings flickering into smoke behind him. At his feet lay the herald's shattered armor, its flames extinguished at last. Above him, the lightning stilled. The silver cracks in the sky faded, one by one, as though the heavens were finally allowed to breathe. Lucen collapsed to his knees, vision blurring. The shard pulsed once, weakly, like a dying heart. The fire sleeps again, the spirit whispered inside him, its voice thin and tired, but it will dream of you. The clouds rolled in, closing around him like a shroud. Far above, the last fragments of the Aegis drifted down through the storm, burning softly as they fell, like ashes still clinging to the memory of a dying sun. Chapter 10, The Light Beyond Flame. The silence that followed the battle was not victory. It was mourning, the kind of hollow quiet that settles when the world is unsure whether to breathe again. Lucen lay upon the fractured stone of the vault, staring up at a sky veined with faint silver fissures. Each line glowed like a dying heartbeat against the pale light of the storm's retreat. The wind carried the scent of ash and rain, but the fire was gone, completely gone. A few steps away, the herald's broken armor cooled in the dim light. The molten plates that once held the fury of a fallen age were now scattered fragments of blackened glass, dissolving as the wind claimed them. His wings, those blazing remnants of a corrupted Dragoon Spirit, crumbled into drifting embers. Lucen tried to move. Pain answered in a wave. His own armor was cracked, the silver light barely holding. His spectral wings flickered behind him, thin outlines, nothing more. The glow inside his chest dimmed with every breath. He pressed a shaking hand against the warm stone beneath him. Deep under the platform, the pulse of the world throbbed faintly. Slow, steady, alive. The spirit stirred inside him, its voice soft and fading. "You have unbound the fire," it whispered, "and it will remember your name." Lucen coughed, the taste of iron rising in his mouth. "Did we save them?" he asked quietly. The spirit answered, "Not yet." The vault shuddered beneath him, cracks spider-webbed across the stone, glowing with molten light. The chains that anchored the citadel groaned as ancient metal fractured under the strain. Lucen forced himself upright, gripping his blade for balance. At the center of the vault, the core began to expand. No longer the red glow of destruction, but a blinding white fire that pulsed with growing urgency. It beat like a newborn star. The spirit's voice deepened. "The weapon was never meant to destroy," it said. "It was made to renew, but it requires a flame to guide its purpose." Lucen stared at the radiant core. The truth settled into him like weight upon a scale. If the vault erupted unguided, Endiness would burn. The scars across the sky would widen. The world would collapse beneath its own ancient light. He looked one last time at the fallen herald. "You wanted to remake the world in fire," Lucen said softly. "Maybe you weren't wrong to want change, only wrong about how." The shard in his hand ignited. Silver light burst from its surface, running through the cracks in his armor until he glowed like a figure carved from starlight. The spirit's whisper trembled. "Lucen, this path ends in light." "I know," he said. The vault roared. The core erupted upward in a pillar of pure white brilliance. Lucen stepped into it, letting the fire consume him. His armor shattered into sparks. His wings flared wide one final time, radiant, whole, divine. Then he rose with the light. The beam swept outward across Endiness, racing through every silver fracture in the sky. Mountains cooled. The scorched rivers turned bright and clear. The storm over the sea of clouds dissolved, revealing a dawn untouched by flame. And for the briefest heartbeat, a dragon's silhouette, enormous, winged, luminous, spanned the heavens above the world. Then it vanished. Far above the clouds, the drifting ruins of the Aegis rocked gently in the new morning. Captain Alara stood at its railing, armor scorched, eyes narrowed against the rising sun. The last fragments of stormlight reflected across her steel plates. She looked toward the vault's distant glow. "Rest well, scholar," she said in a quiet, steady voice. "The fire sleeps in good hands." The wind carried her words away across the sky, and for the first time in an age, the heavens above Endiness were clear. The last ember. The age of fire had ended. Weeks passed before the winds finally swept the ash from the mountains, laying bare what remained of the Vault of Embers. Where the citadel had once hovered, a vast crater now stretched across the earth, its walls smooth and glass-like, its floor a mirror of silver light. The molten stone had cooled into flawless plains, shining with a faint inner glow. No trace of corruption lingered. No flame, no ruin, only silence. From the cliffs above, the surviving airships of Tiberoa drifted through the early dawn. Their hulls were scorched and their banners torn, but they held formation with quiet dignity. Among them, the Aegis floated lower than the others, engines growling weakly as steam curled into the cold morning air. Captain Alara stood at the bow, the dents in her armor catching the pale sun. She stared down into the crater, her expression unreadable. She had seen the final beam from afar, the pillar of light that struck the sky when Lucen vanished. It had been visible from the icy shores of Denningrad, bright enough to cast shadows on the sea. Now there was only stillness. One of her crewmen stepped beside her. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice, "our readings are stable. Whatever energy surge we tracked, it's no longer active." Alara nodded, though her eyes never left the crater. At its center, faint motes of silver light drifted upward in slow spirals, like fireflies rising from a dream. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a single fragment, a shard of silver crystal. Cool against her glove, it had fallen from the pillar of light the day Lucen disappeared, recovered from the deck of the ship, still warm when she found it. As she turned it in her palm, it pulsed once. Faint. Alive. Her first officer approached cautiously. "Captain," he said, "the winds are shifting. We should depart." Alara closed her fingers around the shard. "Set a course for the capital," she replied. The officer paused. "And the crater?" he asked. Alara exhaled slowly, her breath fading into the cold morning air. "Let it rest," she said. "The fire has earned its sleep." The Aegis angled upward, its battered engines heaving against the wind. As it rose, the silver motes continued their ascent, hundreds of them lifting skyward like sparks carried from an unseen forge. Below, deep within the mirrored plains of glass, something stirred. A single heartbeat trembled through the earth, faint, distant, but unmistakable. And on the wind, soft as the memory of flame, a whisper followed. The flame remembers. You've been listening to The Legend of Dragoon, Reign of Ashes, a Sleep Theater radio story. As the fires fade and the sky clears once more over Endiness, the echoes of ancient hearts still stir beneath the earth, sleeping, dreaming, waiting for the next flame to rise. Lucen's light may have vanished into legend, but every ember carries the memory of what was lost and what was reborn. As the rain begins to fall again and thunder hums softly in the distance, let the storm wash away the noise of the waking world. Breathe in the quiet, drift into the sound of the rain and the rhythm of a dragon's heartbeat beneath the clouds. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more tales of mystery, magic, and myth to life through the sound of rain and thunder. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and thank you for listening.